Hey, good morning, everyone. And I apologize in advance about some technical difficulties that we had when we started recording the evening that we held our 2019 Sophomore Parent Information Night. And so I'm recording this today on Friday in an effort to make sure that we get the information out to you. So I'm going to do my best to recreate what we talked about on Wednesday night here in September. And so as we go through this, there won't be any live questions as there was at the event, but you are able to follow up and email me or set up appointments should you want to make sure that we spend time together answering any questions. So I'm going to get right into this. And one of the things that is pretty important is introducing myself. It's pretty much the start of our third year where I have not been working with all of our students here at North Tahoe High School. So my name is Jeff Ream, and I have worked here at North Tahoe High School. This is the start of my 8th year. And prior to Ms. Dolberg coming onto the team, I had worked with all students, so all 9th through 12th graders. So it's taken a little bit of getting used to getting into this idea of really not working with all of our students, but still seeing people around campus. So I kind of get to know some students and parents along the way, but we never really get to work directly together typically. And so this is the first year that that's happened. So to give you a little bit of background and a little bit of idea what we're going to talk about today, I'm going to continue kind of giving you a little bit of context about who I am and why I'm doing what I'm doing as a school counselor. But I want to walk us through throughout this about 45 minutes or an hour or so about some interesting information that I have found about students in 10th grade over my experience as a school counselor. We'll also take a little bit of time talking about what sophomore year generally looks like. We'll break down the A through G requirements a little bit more. I know Lisa, Ms. Dolberg, had gone over a good portion of that with you already, but I want to make sure that we review it. It's very important. We'll talk about some testing pieces, which actually has an impact coming up very shortly. And then talk about college and careers and different aspects of the thought process that really sticks with this sophomore year. And so just as follow along, and then if you feel free to take notes, and then on this YouTube link, if you look at the description, there'll be a link to the Google slide deck that I have on the screen right now. But if you wanted to click any links or send it to someone or download it or whatever you want to do with it, it is available for you to do that. So kind of give you a little bit of background about who I am. So on the screen, you see a couple pictures. I'm married. My wife's name is Jackie, and I have a 3-year-old son named Joel. I also have a dog named Kira. But outside of school, I really like to do a lot of, I really like to cook. I play music. I'm really into technology, so I do a lot of stuff with technology, both professionally and just for fun. So that's a little bit about me, but kind of my professional background. Like I said, I've been at North Tahoe High School for 8 years, but I didn't start my post-high-school training and education in the world of education. I graduated high school. Essentially my goal throughout high school, I wanted to become an Air Force fighter pilot. And very quickly, I determined that number one is I don't like roller coasters. And I figured if I don't like roller coasters, flying at Mach 1 straight down or straight up is probably not the best career field for me. I probably would have got used to it, but I've quickly decided that might not be for me. So I decided, you know what, if I can't, I'm really into aviation, and if I can't fly them, maybe I can design them. And so that's a piece that, I pursued, and I ended up going to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and I studied there for 2 years as an aerospace engineer. And I had this idea, and this kind of brings a lot of context to what we'll talk about today as 10th graders. I had this idea in high school about maybe what engineering might be, and I think that I maybe misled myself a little bit. I didn't really anticipate it being so much math and science, believe it or not. And I think instead of figuring out how to keep planes in the air, probably the most important fact of designing an airplane, I thought more about making it look really cool. And so that's a big piece that really I didn't really think through, and I could have saved myself a lot of time and energy and effort by really making sure that I had done my research ahead of time. So I did about 2 years worth of coursework and a lot of calculus, a lot of physics, and then I transferred to being a teacher ed program. Did a lot of macaroni art after that and lesson planning, but I knew I didn't want to be a teacher. Both my parents are teachers or were teachers, retired, but I didn't really want that classroom environment, and I knew that that school counselors were pretty cool on my campus as a high school student, and so I thought that would be a great fit for me. So I do bring some different perspectives potentially than many school counselors maybe you've worked with in the past, just with kind of my outlook as that kind of engineering side of me comes out in different areas. And so that just gives you a little bit of the context. And I think that's important because you have to know kind of where I'm coming from when we have conversations and what I've been, my experience and my background as an educator. And so as we get to know you and your students, as you go through the next couple of years of high school, I will work with you through 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And so that's just an important piece. A couple other housekeeping pieces. I do encourage, if you are able to make it to the events, it's typically a much more fruitful experience for people. You will get all the same information through the recording, but it's a little bit more interactive and engaging potentially at the event. And the benefit is really being able to ask questions as they maybe come up. So while you can't do that on YouTube necessarily, you can follow up with me, like I said. Just like with Ms. Dolberg as well, I run my office and my schedule based on appointments. And so I want to make sure that you know how to find that. So if you go to the Nortel High School website, so nths.ttusd.org, there's a programs menu. And I think this screenshot might be slightly old, but if you looked on the screenshot under the programs menu, I think it'll take you to a separate page. However, when you click on that, you're going to find the area called school counseling. And I've spent quite a bit of time developing our school counseling website. And so I want to make sure that you have something that's useful in front of you. And so that's going to take you to a separate website. It's based on Weebly, which is a website tool. And when you click on it, it's going to look kind of like this. The picture might change. A few things might change, like buttons that you might see. But there will always be a few key pieces. That menu item at the top. Quick Links is going to have kind of your most commonly clicked links, appointments, Naviance, information about transcripts or registrar, things like that will be up there. Counseling support towards that top, if you see, that's where the menu item is right now. School counseling has 3 different domains that we work in: academic counseling, social emotional counseling, and college and career counseling. And so I've created little menus underneath each of those things. And so when you hover over that, it'll lead you to some more menu items with resources that fall underneath each of those things. Okay, so I encourage you to explore these resources that we spent time to post. But some common places that people look also is, where do I make an appointment? And so because we do this online, you can actually click on the link and you'll see the live availability of our current calendar. So it saves kind of the back and forth emails or voicemails or things like that. And you can basically book an appointment. Students and parents are able to do this for the amount of time you think is needed, as well as when works for you. In addition, the link to YouTube, where you might be watching this video now, is also available on this page, as is Naviance and a few other key pieces of information. So I encourage you to please check out our school counseling website. If you think there's a resource that might be missing, feel free to reach out and let us know, and we'll do our best to add something. Another piece of information that I want to get out towards the beginning here is we have a cool event this is going to be, I think, our 3rd year doing so. Excuse me, it might actually be our 4th. But it's a college admissions case study. And what that is, if you're not familiar, if you haven't attended in the past, is basically when students are applying in senior year to different 4-year colleges and universities, which we will talk briefly about tonight or this morning through this recording, is going through that application process is fairly stressful and complicated. But once you hit that submit button when you're done, many times you don't really know what happens next. And so this event actually brings in college admissions reps, so people who actually are in charge of reading this process and making decisions about students. We'll have about 7 or 8 different reps, and they will come in and they will show us and lead us through conversations about what actually happens when you get a set of applications. And students and parents are both invited to this. And you'll actually read some fake applications. And through that process, you'll be able to have conversations about who gets in and why, or who doesn't get in and why, based on some specified information that we provide through these application packets. Okay, there is pre-registration, so you do have to be registered, and every single attendee must be registered. So please make sure that you register each person in their own name. You can have multiple tickets, but everyone will need that because that's how we create groups as well as name tags. And the event is open to any high school student throughout our district and Sugar Bowl Academy, Tahoe Expedition Academy, but we do ask that it's only limited to high school students and parents of those high school students, primarily because The event typically does kind of max out in terms of tickets, and so we don't want necessarily students in middle school or things like that who might not get a whole lot of relevant information from this event. So please make sure you register for that. That's on October 26th, starting at 2:30 to 5 p.m. here at North Tahoe High School. I'm going to go ahead and show you a quick video from Hillary. Hillary is our Wellness Center Coordinator or Liaison here at North Tahoe High School, and she is a key component of our counseling team. While she's not a school counselor, she is a key component of our team and really, really is a valuable asset here at North Tahoe High School. You might also know her as the Link Crew coordinator with Miss Renella. And so I just want to show you, she's got about a 2-minute video here, and I'm hoping this kind of comes through on the video recording. But if you can't hear it, we'll try to make sure that you get an access to this link. But she just talks a little bit about her programs and what's available. So here we go.
Hello, Laker families. My name is Hillary Stoner, and I am the Wellness Center Liaison for North Tahoe High School. And the Wellness program is a TTUSD program, and it's designed to help high school students access supports, get resources, and it also offers strategies to increase resiliency and overall well-being. As you can see, the Wellness Center is a comfortable spot, and I have tea and sometimes snacks so students can drop in on their breaks and access support, resources, ask questions, or talk to a trusted adult, or it's also just a quiet spot for kids to do work. The Wellness Center also offers empowerment groups and workshops. We offer stuff on self-esteem, body image, stress management, emotional regulation, stuff like that. And we also have resources to provide for families and parents as well. If you have any questions, my email is hstoner@ttusd.org, and again, hstoner@ttusd. And I'm here from 7:30 to 3, so students can access this space anytime in between those hours. Thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you all.
So like I said, Hillary is a great asset to our team, and she connects with students super, super well. Highly trusted adult here on campus, probably one of the people who is probably most connected to our students. But if you have any questions for Hillary or myself or Ms. Dolberg even, please don't hesitate to ask. For many of you, this might be your first student through high school. It might be your second, third, or fourth. But no matter what, things change and different students need different things. And so please don't hesitate to ask any questions that might come up along the way. We talked a little about how to book an appointment. It just helps us streamline the process. For example, I have about 340 students currently on my caseload. And so while the idea is to meet and be available for any student at all times, the reality is that it's pretty difficult. So it really helps us, and it helps me be more efficient and really serve the students who might need things here and there. And so when you book an appointment, it just helps make sure that we are managing our time effectively. We do have a Facebook page. We don't necessarily monitor it all that much any longer because Ms. Mitchell does a great job with our North Tahoe High School Facebook page. So if you don't follow that one, please be sure you do. Important updates and things like that happen. And also, please make sure that you're checking your emails. I kind of apologize in advance most of the time because I send quite a few of them, but I'd rather over-communicate than under-communicate. So I want to make sure that you have all the information in your hands as you need it. Okay, so but again, please don't hesitate to ask any questions. There's a couple pieces of kind of like normal expectations that I want to just go through as students get older. So every year that you're in high school as a student, or every year that your student is in high school as a parent, there's kind of some changes that should be happening. And they're developmentally appropriate, and it is you're hearing it from me. It is you have the full blessing to make sure that happens. Okay, and so one of the biggest things, parents, is that as students get older, you're going to progressively reduce the amount of kind of responsibility you are taking away from them. So that means that you're going to encourage and support, kind of like a cheerleader or a coach, but you're not going to take over that responsibility. And I'll tell you this as an adult that works at school, but also as someone who talks to teachers and other people outside in the community, is that it makes a huge difference in terms of who actually comes and talks to us and asks questions or asks for help or asks for things that they need. When I see the student coming and advocating for themselves and asking, it makes a big difference versus maybe just seeing the parent. And it doesn't mean that we don't necessarily want to see you parents, but it is something that part of our job is not just teaching English, math, and history, but also teaching life skills that are going to help them thrive and be successful contributors to our society in the future. And part of that means they need to be able to advocate for themselves and be able to step a little bit outside their comfort zone, even if it's not easy. Okay, so giving them that chance really helps them grow in that area. Have conversations about what life after high school looks like. College, career, trade schools, work, travel, all those things are things that we're going to discuss and be paying attention to. But what I really want you to do is really make sure that you guys are talking about that now. And it's not necessarily anything super specific or even all that threatening. Sometimes parents, I think, get threatened or like feel a little nervous about talking about it because you might not have the expertise, or maybe you didn't go through this path that maybe your student wants to. But it's really more about being open and just listening and talking about what they want. You do also want to, kind of contrary to letting them have responsibility, you do want to kind of pay attention. Okay. It doesn't mean that you need to step in and solve all their problems. There's a saying out there in kind of our circles of a snowplow parent, or you might have heard a helicopter parent. You don't want to be that parent. But you also don't necessarily want to be the totally hands-off, this kid's going to figure it out on their own parent either. So finding that happy medium is tough, but it is something that, you want to be involved and really make sure that you're following along. However, you want to give them an opportunity to mess up and give them an opportunity to learn from things that maybe they messed up in. Okay, but maybe not on some of those big picture items if possible. That's, failing an English class has some more lasting consequences than maybe getting an F on a project. And so that's a big thing that you just want to kind of learn as a parent of how to figure it out. Students, on the other hand, also have that responsibility of taking in that responsibility piece of kind of stepping into that zone. Another piece is really starting to create and maintain those relationships with teachers. So those teachers that you have in class are going to be the same ones that will be writing you recommendation letters, helping you craft essays, spending a lot of time with and on your kind of next steps in high school. But that also goes for other adults on campus. I feel like most people tend to naturally kind of make relationships with teachers because you spend a lot of time with them. But you also want to make sure that you are spending time with other adults on campus too, myself included. So I write a lot of things, and I want to be able to get to know you as a student, more so just on kind of like what your schedule should be. So definitely take time to set up a meeting. And it doesn't have to be even anything that you want to talk about. Just I want to tell me your story. Tell me what you like to do. Helps me be able to serve you as a student and as a family better. But that also goes for custodians, administrators, office staff, different people around campus also are huge resources that are sometimes underutilized. And then the last thing is really starting to create a calendar. And this becomes ever more so important as you get older in high school. So starting now will help you develop good habits versus having it be tough when you're in junior and senior year, when some of these, calendaring I would say is important in 10th grade, but it becomes vital in 11th and 12th grade because there's a lot of things that really come up that are important for you. So in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to give you a brief kind of overview about what is going on in your teenager's brain, or in your brain if you're a teen and watching this. And it's fairly complicated, so I'm going to try to keep it pretty low level in terms of being accessible. And so I'll use a few kind of technical terms, but in the most part, I'm going to kind of make sure that it's digestible for anybody that's listening. But most people, this is kind of when you see the picture on the screen, this is the general perception of what most students and parents kind of think teenage brains look like. And it's actually, a pretty non-scientific but accurate representation. So you'll see, there's the love lobe, the rebellion center. Down at the very far right, there's the memory for chores and homework. Tends to be forgotten quite frequently. And so our brains are super, super awesome. There's a lot of really great things. They're plastic in the sense that they can grow back from injury or deficit. There is so many things that are awesome about our brain. Sometimes it just doesn't feel quite like that's the case. Sometimes we feel like our brain is broken, whether that's ourselves or maybe we're kind of like banging our head against the wall because our teenager is not making any sense or making poor decisions. And so when we look at the brain, it's kind of broken up into 3 core areas. So there's the reptilian brain. Okay, that is basically the things that help keep you alive. Okay, so that's going to be your breathing, your respiration, your heartbeat, brain function, that kind of stuff. All depends on this. This is pretty much automatic. Okay. And it's part of the autonomic nervous system. And so that is a piece that, most people, if you injure this, that can be very life-threatening. The limbic brain, or the limbic system, controls a lot of the emotional and or feeling and or memory centers of our brain. Okay, it helps codify things. It helps us to manage our lives. And this is the area we'll probably spend most of our time talking about in the next couple minutes. The other area is more the white matter, kind of what we most generally think about when we look at a picture of a brain. This is the neocortex. And so there's different areas of the neocortex. The main one that impacts teenagers, and the thing that we see from teenagers, is what's called the prefrontal cortex. On the picture of the last brain, it's kind of where that love lobe was. And that's kind of the decision-making factor of the brain. So we'll come back to that. But basically, there's two main areas within this limbic system. One is called the hippocampus, and one is called the amygdala. Okay, the amygdala is kind of like the size of an almond or so. And if you made a fist in your hand, it kind of is right where all your fingers kind of come together in that center of the brain. And so that's the piece that is really important for emotions. Okay, and so it spits out a lot of hormones and manages emotions. And this part of the brain is hyperactive when students are kind of in this teenage kind of transitioning 15, 16, 17-year-olds. The other piece that's important to know about your brain is it's technically not fully developed until about 24 to 25. And so students are still going to be going through brain development, but there's a large change that happens kind of in this early teen, mid-teen level. And it starts to kind of taper off, and you still see growth, but the big changes are going to happen kind of in this window of time. The other piece is the hippocampus, which also manages emotions, but also it impacts memory. Okay, and so memory is stored by coding, and so when this hippocampus is inactive, sometimes students find themselves having trouble with some memory, and it also impacts other aspects like decision making and emotion as well. Everything is pretty interlinked in the brain, and so that's just a piece that you have to know about that. These are items that are out of our control. Okay, so students don't have control over their brain. Okay, and so they can't necessarily impact what neurotransmitters or what hormones are being released and things like that within their brain or their body. And so they're going to be feeling the effects of these different chemical imbalances or kind of rushes at different times in their life that does impact their ability to think rationally. And so while we would like them to act like adults, and it's easy for us to think about that because there's a third area that I mentioned earlier, which is that prefrontal cortex, kind of in that front part of the brain. That actually allows us to give forethought. Okay, it does a lot of other things, but that's a big area that allows us to kind of think 3 or 4 steps ahead down the road. That is one of the last areas of the brain to develop as students are kind of going through this. And that's why you see, and that's why we all most typically, and then students right now are experiencing a lot of risk-taking behaviors, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, driving 100 miles an hour because it sounds like a good idea at the time, not really thinking about some of the consequences that might happen from some of their decisions. Okay, so in many circumstances, it doesn't necessarily make an excuse for their poor choices, but at least hopefully you can have some understanding. And that's kind of the goal of kind of this neurobiology bit, is that there should be consequences for poor choices, hopefully not lasting ones, but you also have to, as an adult, we have that ability to think 3 or 4 steps down the road where they lack some of those decision-making skills. And so just having that understanding when you're talking with students, or knowing in that midst of kind of like assigning consequences or things like that, is that, the goal is they help make better decisions, but sometimes it's not as easy as we might like it to be or think it should be. Okay, so that's just a big piece. This picture here shows some scans of the different areas of the brain, and kind of between age 5 and age 20, kind of how things start to activate. And so the purple is the active parts of the brain. And so as you see, as people grow up, more parts of that brain are becoming more and more active. Okay, and so what you can see is that front part of that big white matter is one of the last parts to kind of fully develop. And so that's a big piece that, like I mentioned, impacts how students look at life. Going on with that, but kind of transitioning into more of the typical stuff that we see as a sophomore, is many times that kind of lack of thinking ahead. They're getting to an age where they're kind of teetering on kind of teen to young adult. So they think that they have the ability and they're old enough to make their own decisions. However, most of the time, because they can't think those 3 steps down the road, they lack good information to do so. Okay, and so they want all this responsibility. They want to take it on. They want to challenge themselves with a lot of heavy coursework, or they want to have their own car, or whatever it might be, have a job and do all these other things and really overload themselves with responsibility. but then they don't have the follow through sometimes to make that happen, or the prioritization or things like that. Okay, and you'll see that happen a lot. You might see the next line and say that, yep, that's my kid. For example, like prioritizing socializing over their academics. High school and teenage years are a high social growth area as well. That's another part of the brain that develops over this time, and it's important. But many times, they can potentially set maybe unhealthy or unproductive amounts of time towards that. What I also see, and this is hopefully a little bit more hope than some of the other information about like, oh my gosh, we're screwed. My kids can't think straight. But there is a big change. There's three main transitions that happen that I noticed in high school. One is 8th to 9th grade. It's kind of that intro to high school transition. Kids are kind of figuring out how things work, learning about themselves, maybe redefining themselves, and making some more decisions on their own. They get a little more freedom and things like that. The second one is the other obvious one, is from high school to life or college or whatever else happens after high school. And that's a big one too, because they're again kind of redefining yourself and really setting new goals, kind of taking that next level of responsibility. And so that's a big piece that you have to just be aware of. The other piece is this 10th through 11th grade. So at the end of this year, towards the end of this year, going into junior year, you're going to have some big changes as well. There's maturation that happens. This brain development kind of rapidly happens. But I think also what happens is students kind of make a light clicks in their head a little bit about, I'm going to be getting out of high school in the next couple of years, and I kind of got to get my stuff together and make sure that I'm working towards something. And so I usually see if your student has struggled in the past year and a half or year, I see usually a big change. The hard part is many times they might have dug themselves in a hole potentially, or made some choices that impacted different things, and now they want to try to fix it, and maybe they have the ability to now, but it does make some transition, so they might be much better students and a little bit more manageable and at home and things like that. But sometimes it's a frustrating one too, because they have realized this and want to make changes or have made changes, but sometimes things are hard to go back and fix. However, it's generally not too late as a 10th grader. The more that students can get back on track earlier, if they're off track, the better it is and the faster it is to do. However, there are steps that students should take to really make sure that they don't waste this time. It is much easier to solve problems earlier rather than trying to do it as a junior or a senior once you realize certain things. Okay, so really working now to make this education and this free access to education a priority. These next couple years, or the last few years, that you're going to have free pretty much anything for the most part. And so if you want to go get further training or education, you're going to pay a lot of good money and a lot of good time for that outside of high school. So that's just a big piece just to be aware of. And really, by not taking advantage of these things, we kind of slam doors to success. Okay, and so our goal and our kind of mission here at North Tahoe High School, and sometimes it's a little bit sometimes misconstrued, I would say, in the sense that I think there's a perception that the adults here at North Tahoe High School, or even the students and teachers and maybe parents, that every student at North Tahoe High School we think should go to a 4-year university or college. And that's not necessarily accurate, but what we do think is that every student that wants to should be able to. And so that it doesn't look all that different, but it does change kind of the intention. There are a number of different avenues that students can pursue, and we'll look closely at some of those later. But all paths are valuable paths, whether that's a 4-year university, a junior college, a trade school, the military, a gap year, service projects, whatever it might be. The piece that I think we are really trying to do is to make 12th grade not be the end of students' learning process, okay, formal education or training. And that's the big piece. And so the hard part about it is, and the piece we struggle with and are challenged with, is if students want to have that 4-year option as a, kind of a plan after high school, there are certain steps that happen throughout high school that they must meet. So there are benchmarks. All right. And so part of that's meeting graduation requirements, and these A through G requirements, which, just to give you a reminder, those A through G are the CSU and UC kind of coursework requirements that students have to meet at a minimum level to apply to those 4-year universities: the University of California, or UC system, and the California State University system, or CSUs. Okay. However, we also realize that balance and fit are vitally important. Okay. So we want to make sure that students are taking on an appropriate load, so they're being challenged, but they're not being challenged so much that they can't also participate in other things. Okay. So that idea of stress and overcommitting. If you think of a piece of paper, for example, when you write on a piece of paper, there's generally a margin. And that's, you can doodle in that. You can write notes. Okay. But if you filled up your piece of paper with just writing, it becomes pretty unreadable. And so you need to have this white space in your life to make sure that you are allowing the space to grow, allowing space for things if things come up. Some things are unpredictable in life. And so if you fill up your entire plate with everything and something changes, you might not have the bandwidth to really manage it. And so really allowing, yes, we want students to challenge themselves, but by no means does every student need to take all AP classes that we offer, for example. Okay, and so that balance and fit is something that you'll hear us talk about over and over again, because we've noticed a lot of things. That transition, like I said, from 10th to 11th grade is big, and students tend to bite off quite a large chunk. Okay, on this graph you can see on the screen, on the y-axis, the left side is effort undertaking. So this is primarily academic effort and undertaking, and on the bottom is kind of a time frame, so 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. Most students start off high school taking about the same classes. Okay, it's pretty standardized. 10th grade tends to be pretty standardized too. You have a few more options in terms of maybe an AP class or two, and so that's kind of representative in that hump. One of the big things that we noticed, though, is this. In 11th grade, students really think that, 11th grade is the most important year. It's very important. All high school is important, and it is a bigger year, but that they need to be taking as much as they can handle, and maybe even more. Okay, and so we see students really taking quite a bit. And so we've noticed that in the past that students have struggled with it at times, and it's had impacts in different areas, from academic to mental health and things like that. And so as a senior, they kind of drop back down a little bit. Sometimes they hit that cruise control button as a senior. I'm going to take 4 classes and then I'm going to have 2 periods off. Well, that might be perfectly appropriate for that student. It might not, it's more, I would rather see maybe a more balanced curve in this kind of graph. The other thing that's important too is this happens. So this is called senioritis, and we'll talk more about this as students get older, but just so you know, and you kind of predict this is pretty universal among students in senior year. I would say a good 80 to 90% of students experience it at one level or another. Sometimes it's debilitating, other times it's just a little blip, and they work themselves through it, but it's something that we have to keep on our radar, and it's a big deal. Most of the time this happens in the spring, and it's going to be something that we just really have to be vigilant about, because it can make big differences in terms of not only college or post-secondary plans and options, because if you fail a class or you really kind of lose track of where you're at academically, they can change admissions decisions, but it can also change graduation. I mean, it's as serious as that. So it's a big thing. So I'm going to take us through briefly, and I know Ms. Dolberg probably went through this last year, but I'm going to just highlight a few things and just remind us about what our A through G requirements are. Like I said, that's for the CSU and UC system. And each letter of A through G has a subject area requirement. Most of these things are aligned with our graduation requirements. And a big difference that really kind of get people in trouble is the grade difference of how you earn credit. Okay, so for graduation requirements, students earn credits as long as they don't earn an F. Okay, so anything above an F, so D's, C's, B's, and A's, will earn students credits towards meeting graduation requirements. However, for meeting these requirements for CSUs and UCs, you must pass with a C minus technically. Minus and pluses don't really matter in terms of meeting eligibility. But you must pass with a grade of C or higher. So that D grade, while you can earn credits towards graduation, will not let you meet eligibility requirements. So if you earned a C, for example, when we get to the next section, which is English, you need 4 years of an English class. And so if you got a C in that, you're automatically now ineligible until that is fixed to apply, to even submit your application to a CSU or UC for consideration. You could have perfect grades in other areas, the perfect test score, but you're then ineligible unless we fix that D or F in that grade or in that subject area. So you need 2 years of history. In high school, you're actually going to get more years of history than you need for college. Okay, so you're going to have a modern world history or human geography in 10th grade, which most students are probably in this year if you're watching this video. A U.S. history course or AP U.S. history course in 11th grade, and then a government and economics class that will happen in senior year. The government course actually is the only part of that course. It's the first semester, the first half of that 2-semester long sequence in senior year. That fills a history class. We'll see economics pop up in a second. English is also one that matches pretty well with our graduation requirements. Students need 4 years of English to graduate, but again, must be a C or better to qualify with this A through G requirements. And so another common question is, what about CR College or things like that? Those classes would fill kind of the 11th and 12th grade English classes. So you do need the 4 years, so that it just looks slightly different. With math, math is a little bit tricky sometimes, so we might spend just a little bit longer on this slide. So you do need 3 years of math to qualify for this college requirement. You actually need 3 years of math to actually graduate as well, so 30 credits. However, the difference is going to be what the math, not only just the grades, so C or better to qualify for A through G, but what math classes you're taking. All right, so for A through G requirements, students must get through the equivalent of Integrated Math 3 or Algebra 2 on the old system if you're kind of questioning what that Integrated 3 is about. So they must get through Integrated Math 3 at a minimum. Okay, that could be the third year math, so they might have started in Math 1 and what took 1, 2, and 3. And if they got through 3, they then can qualify to submit. Students generally take more years than that, so it's highly encouraged to take additional years of math beyond that. Some of the confusion often comes in from the fact that maybe students took Integrated Math 1 as an 8th grader. There's an area on both these applications to add 8th grade math, but it's really not about grades. It's just that you're saying that you took it, and more likely than not, students will take these other classes throughout high school, and so they might have taken Integrated Math 2 and 3 in high school, and technically, according to the CSUs and UCs, you'll have met that 3-year math requirement. However, if you do that, you still haven't met our high school graduation requirement. So students would need to take a 3rd year of math, which might be the pre-calculus course, it might be our senior math or QRAT course, or potentially a business math course, and we'll talk briefly about that difference later. So that business math course is actually an elective course in terms of colleges, so it's not a higher level math course, so it doesn't actually meet one of these year requirements, but it can for graduation. That green 4 is just that's a highly suggested year, so it's really kind of like an elective that you can take, but it's pretty important for most schools. A big thing that might be a little more detailed than you might need, but just I want to make sure to mention, is that in high school, you must have taken a geometry equivalent course. Okay, so you must have done that, and so it's pretty important to be able to list that. You can validate a geometry course, meaning we can take a higher level of calculus or something like that and cover any deficient grades, but you cannot omit a geometry course, meaning you can just like take Integrated Math 1 and 3 and call it good. You have to have taken Integrated 2 or geometry at some point during your high school career. So that's an important thing, and most students do that, but it's just an important note if you're maybe potentially a little more advanced in mathematics, and so that's something you'd want to talk to me about if you find yourself in that situation. Laboratory science is also somewhat of a tricky one, but it's pretty simple because we require 2 years for graduation as well, both a physical and a life science for graduation. They have the same requirement for college, so 2 years of lab science, a physical and a biological science or life science. The big difference is they have to be a laboratory science. All right, and the big thing here is going to be if you're taking any online courses. This is why generally students do not find any online science classes available, because they don't have a wet lab, which means someone is going to oversee kind of a real dissection or chemical experiment or things like that, which is tough to do in an online setting. The other thing is that I get questions about is like psychology. That's a social science. Why doesn't it show up in D? So social sciences actually don't fall underneath this. There's not a wet lab component. So if you see any like psychology classes, things like that, they'll be in a different category we'll get to in category G. Those green 3s and 4s are simply similar to math, highly recommended, especially if you're going into any STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math, but just generally advisable because they are going to be what become kind of like your upper division electives. They're technically still science classes, but they really are electives, and they're going to show that, take you from kind of being meeting minimum requirements to being competitive in this college environment. Okay, again, always with this year better, but here's some examples of some of our D area classes that students can take. E is language other than English or world language, and you need 2 years of a world language, and this is a difference from our graduation requirements. For graduation, you need 1 year of a world language or a fine performing art. Okay, so it's not, students can graduate without ever taking another language other than English, but you can't apply to college without doing that. Okay, so that's a big difference from our graduation requirements. Always a C or better, but it has to be 2 years of the same language. All right, so it can't be French 1 and Spanish 1. It has to be French 1 and 2, Spanish 1 and 2, for example. And this is also another confusing one because of our immersion program. So we have students that might enter high school in a Spanish 3 for Spanish speakers class, or maybe you entered in Spanish 2. For this kind of requirement, it's still advised that you go and take as much as you're willing and able to and interested in taking. You have to at least get through Spanish 2, whether you start in Spanish 2 or Spanish 1. If you started in Spanish 3 for Spanish speakers, you're kind of technically meeting this level 3 requirement. By taking a higher level, they give you kind of essentially credit, for lack of a better word, for those lower level classes. So by taking Spanish 3 for Spanish speakers, if you complete that whole year, you're technically done with this requirement, but I do suggest, it's a pretty good idea to continue into Spanish, AP Spanish at that upper level. This is another difference. Like I said, this is a combined requirement, world language or performing or visual arts in our graduation requirements, but in college, you need a separate visual performing art for a year, and it has to be the same course. It can't be 2 semester long performing arts, like a semester of ceramics and then a semester of chorus. And usually you see that at other schools, maybe if you transferred in. All of our stuff here at North Tahoe High School is year long, so that you're fine there, but you do have to take one of those classes. Bands all count, as does like art, ceramics, and photography. And then finally is college prep elective or CPE. And you need 1 year of this, and this is probably the easiest area to get qualified for. So it's any of the additional ones, so any of those green letters or numbers, that you saw up above on previous slides. So if you took a pre-calculus class, for example, that would be qualifying as a career college prep elective, as well as any of the below classes. So the economics class that I mentioned earlier, that's a half of a year one that every student will have to take to graduate high school. As long as you get a C or better, it'll help fill this requirement. Psychology, engineering, culinary, business math, some life sciences, things like that. So general kind of like life or physical science, which we generally don't offer, but if we did, those would fall underneath this college preparatory elective class. And so this is, once you have all of these credits done, most students are not finished taking courses to prepare them for college, but this allows you to now submit an application. You've met the minimum expectations, and now you're taking classes really to become more well qualified and more competitive. And what that means is, so I asked people that attended to please describe a tree that looks like this. And if you looked at this vision of a tree, it's pretty close in. You're not really seeing a whole lot. This is most people's general perception of what college looks like, college applications. And so when you do that, it's going to be something that people will see, think they only look at your grades and transcripts and your test scores. And there's very few circumstances where that's actually true. The one exception is that CSU or California State University's system. They do not really look super holistically at students. You do look a lot like this picture in that system, but they do a very good job of admitting students. So they admit a large amount of California students. So while this is not very holistic, most students will find a spot at a CSU if they're meeting all these different A through G requirements. It might not be the one of your choice, but you should have a seat available if you meet A through G. But for the most part, UCs, private schools, many other schools will use a different system called comprehensive review. And it's more of a picture that looks like this. Okay, that picture of that small chunk of the tree is important. So it's still, that trunk is still there. Those are still going to be your test scores, GPA, transcripts, that kind of stuff, coursework you're taking. That's what kind of supports the other aspects and makes sure that the leaves and the branches and stuff like that all are able to stand on their own. But they also take into account other factors that are important. Is the tree alive? What type of tree is it? Where's it at? Okay, you couldn't tell that from that little view. And so they back it out and they want to see the student more as a whole person. What are they interested in? What are they doing outside of school? Why are they taking certain classes? What's their family dynamic look like? All those things are valuable pieces of information when admissions officers in four-year colleges are trying to craft a class. Okay, they don't, believe it or not, want all valedictorian students. They don't all want star quarterbacks. Like, they want a variety of students that's going to create a diverse and well-rounded student body on campus. A couple things just to keep in mind about sophomore year. All right, so the biggest job that a sophomore has is really to continue learning and continue performing. Okay, and so what that means is just really making an effort to really keep or maintain or improve grades. That's going to be the biggest thing that helps, not only in the long-term learning process, but in the world of kind of this post-secondary planning piece. Whether or not you're going to a four-year college, preparing for a four-year college has many helpful tools, whether you're going straight to a job or going to go to a trade school. That's not just about meeting expectations. It's about becoming a widely diverse learner with a lot of interests and a lot of skills and a lot of understanding about critical thinking and planning and time management and things like that. Okay. The 10th grade year is the first year that CSUs will look at for calculation of GPA. CSUs and UCs do not use ninth grade. They use ninth grade to meet requirements. They do see grades, but in terms of calculating GPAs, the 10th grade is actually the first year. So on your transcript, if you look, there's a section that will probably show 0.0 until the end of the first semester, and that's because that you don't have a 10th grade GPA yet. Failing classes or struggling in classes can cause a trickle-down effect. Many of our classes are sequential, especially like math and English and stuff like that. That's going to be something that if you have trouble in Integrated Math 1 and you try to do Integrated Math 2, you might find yourself struggling because you didn't learn some of the concepts. Okay, so keep in mind that if you fail a class, it's not the end of the world, but we want to address it sooner rather than later. Similar to that comprehensive view, you want to make sure that you're getting involved in something other than just school. That means volunteering, playing a sport, getting involved with a job. Jobs and childcare and stuff like that are valuable experiences, even though some people might say they're not. It's really thinking about the why behind the what. Don't do things just to make sure that it's on your college application or on your resume or things like that. You want to do something that you're interested in as much as possible, but really thinking about why you're doing certain things and doing things with purpose. All right. And then also challenging yourself. Like I said earlier, balance is important. We want people to take challenging coursework, but we don't want people to be so overwhelmed that they can't handle it or do some of these other things that are valuable in all aspects of college admissions, life development, and other things. Okay, so we want to find that balance of in-school and out-of-school activities. There are some upcoming test information that students will need to know. For example, the PSAT. Students in 9th grade last year took the PSAT 9. In 10th and 11th grade, students will also take the PSAT. It looks a little bit different. It's a little bit longer than that test that they took last year, but it looks pretty similar. And they will be doing this on October 16th, which is a Wednesday during school. It's free for all of our students, so all 10th graders will take it, and they have to show up to school just on time that day. A note that this is a Wednesday, so many students might think this is RTI. There will not be RTI on this day, and information will come out to parents and students about this in the next week or so. With schedules and stuff like that. But students need to know that if they show up and they skip RTI for any reason or they're late, they will not be able to take this exam, and will not be super happy with them. It creates a lot of challenges having students who show up late for a timed exam like this because we can't admit them at a certain point. Another thing that students will be doing, and before I move on, actually, I want to just mention the PSAT is the P is technically preliminary in the name of the exam, but it's really practice in my mind. Okay, so don't stress about it. It's really exposure and practice to some of these tests, and that's why we give it. And that's why we give it so frequently. By practicing these longer, kind of higher stakes exams, students become a little bit more comfortable. They understand what the testing process looks like, what are the rules, responsibilities, expectations, and also the questions. How are they asking questions, and what do I need to know? So don't stress too much about taking the PSAT. Your scores don't go anywhere other than us, and so it's not something that students need to be worried about. But if they look at it as like an opportunity to get ready for an SAT or ACT, if they wanted to take that in their junior and senior year later on, this is really one of the best ways to prepare for it. Another thing that's going to be on the to-do list is research. So sophomore and junior year is all about figuring out what matters to them. Okay, colleges and careers. I underlined careers on this slide because it's hard to research colleges without the context of what career field you might be looking at. And I know it's hard to ask a 15 or 16-year-old student to research what do you want to do when you grow up. But the more that you're able to specify that, even if it's in a general direction, like, hey, I'm kind of interested in health sciences, or I'm going to spend some time looking at what is an engineer and what does that do, it helps make sure that your college research is fruitful. For example, an issue comes up if you say, I want to be an engineer, and you apply to a pure liberal arts school, which doesn't have an engineering program potentially. Okay, and then it's pretty tough to make some good decisions about that without having at least a little bit of direction. There are ways to be undeclared and things like that, which we won't talk about much in 10th grade, but it's just something that in this year, researching both colleges and careers is pretty important, and some of this will happen in your pathways classes at school. Traveling and visiting colleges all are important, and then keeping information updated. So track what you're doing. When you're applying to college or putting things on resumes for jobs or trade schools or whatever you might be doing after high school, you have to be accurate with what your experience has been. So that's hard to do. If you did a big service project, you might remember certain aspects of it, but you might not remember dates or like have a recommendation letter handy or things like that, which will be useful as you get older. So write things down. Have kind of a brag sheet that you keep key pieces of information that you're pretty proud of, or key artifacts from school or personal life or things like that. Okay, so just put that aside or make a note of it somewhere. We talked about the PSAT. We're going to skip that. We're going to skip the SAT for now. That's something that we'll talk about towards the beginning of the junior year because it's generally about halfway through junior year when students actually take the SAT. But if you wanted to pause the video and take a few notes on this, there's a lot of information also on the website for the SAT, the Scholastic Aptitude Test from the College Board that you can check out. There are a few big changes, and really you probably won't know much different unless you had older kids. But this is the first year that most students maybe have an AP exam or two or an AP course. AP exams are capstone exams that happen at the end of the course. Okay, so it's not something that you take to get into an AP exam. It's something that shows that what you learned from the AP exam that you took all year. They happen in the first week or two of May, and there are specific dates and times for each exam and each exam subject. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know is you do need to check those calendars. They're on our school calendar, but I would also, if you Googled 2020 AP exams, probably one of the first link or two is going to take you straight to the College Board website, and they publish 2 years in advance when the AP exam test dates are going to be. So you can look up 2020, and I believe even at this point they have the 2021 test dates up. This is important because there are no late or alternate testing available here at North Tahoe High School or in TTUSD. There are extremely few exceptions to that, and unfortunately, sports are not one of them. Unfortunately, NI2A, our sports division, schedules many sport regionals and final events during these 2 weeks, which makes absolutely no sense to me, but we've talked to them. If you want to talk to them and let them know how much of a kind of a rock and a hard place it puts the school and the students, please do. I do it every year. They have a lot of reasoning, and I'm not jealous of being in their position of having to make a hard decision like that, but it makes little sense to me to schedule AP exams, which many of their students who will be competing are involved in. AP exams happen around the world during these times, and so it is something that is unfortunate, but it's something that we have to just make sure that you know about ahead of time. So please add any coursework that your students are taking in AP, whether or not they sign up for the exam, just on the calendar so you know when it's at. With the registration piece, all that's going to be done through a student's College Board portal. Most students now, since we're doing the PSAT 9, will have College Board accounts already, whether they know it or not. And so they need to be able to access that. And that's something that they should be starting to look at. If they don't know their login, they need to make sure that they use the Forgot My Password or recovery account. And if not, you might have to call the College Board directly. We do not have any access to College Board accounts here at school. So our best level of support is going to be potentially helping a student click and follow through with the Forgot My Password link, which you can probably do at home. It's just like recovering an email password with Google. But if not, we're going to give you a phone number, and the student and parent will have to call the College Board. So it's nothing that we can actually talk to or reset on our own. Registration is actually much earlier than it has been in the past, and this is a brand new change set forth by the College Board for us. It used to be about February or so that students would register, and now the deadline, the last date that students will be able to select on their College Board portal if they're taking an exam or not, is going to be November 8th. Okay, we're going to send a lot of information, and many times this will happen in their student's classroom, but it's something just to put on your calendar, be aware about, because there's no exceptions after this. We will not be adding in any additional test takers after November 8th. And if you decided not to take an exam after this, there's going to be a fee assessed by the College Board, plus the original registration fee for a non-test cost. And so the fees for each AP exam, so if you're on free and reduced lunch here at school, then you can take an exam for $20 each. If you're not on free and reduced lunch at school, then it's $50 per exam. And that's about a $40 or $50 reduction from the regular cost that College Board gives us, thanks to TTUSD stepping in and supporting families and students in taking these exams. So they're normally about $94 each. So $50 with regular price, $20 if you're on free and reduced. The last thing I'll mention before we end the recording is just reminding students that academic expectations are rising every year that you go through high school. And so 1 to 2 means that students should be expected to spend about 1 to 2 hours a night within homework. And on average, students spend about 19 hours across the United States in a study, and that's by far not enough for most students. Studying is not necessarily just assigned homework either. So it's something that sometimes I hear is that, well, I didn't get any homework, so I didn't spend any time last night at home. And that's pretty elementary mindset. So homework is things that, teachers do assign homework, and there's value to homework because it's structured practice and review. But many times students struggle, for example, on tests. They're like, I get all the homework, but I didn't really understand the test. Well, it's most likely that means is you didn't spend enough time and reflection on that homework. And you might need to add some assignments of your own and review of your own to really make sure you understand the content. Okay, so making sure that you have this will not only help this year, but also help in years in the future. Okay, so please just make sure that there's time at home to make sure that studying and practice and preparation are happening. Also, another reminder that community service is required. So by May of 2022, students will need to have 30 hours of documented homework of community service here at school. A big change that well, not big, but a change that happens between last year and this year is that last year students required 6 hours of community service, and from this year forward they'll require 8 hours each year to remain on track. There are 2 requirements of community service. One is the overall 30 hours. So that is a district-wide mandate that all seniors who walk across the stage at graduation must have documented 30 hours or more of community service. If you do not have, if you have 29 and a half hours documented, and at 4 o'clock at graduation day, you will not be participating in graduation and you will not be receiving a high school diploma. It's just like failing an English class. So that's very important, and don't wait until the very end of the senior year to document anything. The other requirement is our part of our pathways grade. So students receive a pass or fail on a pathways class for 1 credit per semester. We've structured it in a way that each year students do have a yearly requirement and expectation to pass pathways to complete these hours in this sequence. So 6, 8, 8, 8. So a student could do 30 hours as a freshman. Maybe they've completed that and documented it. They've completed one of those expectations. So if they didn't do any additional community service for the rest of their high school career, they will still be able to graduate. However, they would not pass pathways in each semester thereafter. Okay, so they would not earn a pass in those pathways classes. Generally, relatively non-impactful in terms of college and stuff like that, but it's a slight, demerit on their transcript, and they don't earn those 1 credits, which is not necessarily needed for units most likely, but it could if your student is a struggling student. So that's just the note about the 2 different requirements. We're going to skip over the transcript review. It's a little bit easier in person, so if you had questions about it, I encourage you to check it out. Most 9th, 10th grade transcripts are pretty empty at this point. So you'll probably just see kind of on the left side of the screen here, just the 9th grade grades. Check the classes. That's the biggest thing at this point. Just check to make sure everything looks accurate. Many times we'll have students will look much more closely during senior year. And so if you check it earlier and often, it's much easier if we see an error, and errors do happen. Teachers and myself and Miss Carrillo, our registrar, all these things are entered sometimes by hand, or like grades are entered by hand and things like that. And so if you catch something, please let us know. Don't let it sit and fester and wait, and we can look into it. It might not be changeable. It might be an error, but no matter what, we should at least take a look at it. But it's easier to do so as immediately as possible. Okay. Naviance Family Connection is also available, and that's something that students will continue and increasingly use as they go through high school. I would say the big wheelhouse of Naviance is in kind of the 11th and 12th grade with some of the college and career planning tools. But 9th, 10th grade students will use it, and students will be doing some lessons as a part of pathways that are embedded in Naviance starting this year as well. So they do that. Mr. Jameson, our career tech, has also, I believe, reached out to parents. And if you are interested in getting access to Naviance Family Connection, you can feel free to respond to an email he sent, or feel free to reach out to me and I can put you in connection. And he's happy to set up an appointment and help show you some of the tools and get you connected. It's tough for parents because we can't actually collect all the information we need to automatically create you accounts, and so we need to manually do that. And so that means if you're interested, we can definitely do that. It just needs a little bit of information from you. Okay. So, like I said, made it just about an hour. And if you have any questions, going to be hard to respond likely right now as you're watching a video. You can feel free to leave a comment if you have a question, but most likely the easiest way is actually to send me an email. You can also feel free to set up an appointment. There's one last thing I'll just mention, kind of year-long wise. So 10th grade is a year that we don't hold a formal ILP, or individual learning plan meeting. You had one of those in 9th grade with Ms. Dolberg, kind of an academic planning meeting. We don't hold formalized ILPs, so meaning we don't hold meetings where we ensure that we're sitting down with every single 10th grader. We do that in 9th, 11th, and 12th grade. Part of the reason is because they're quite extensive in terms of the planning and organization. They're also quite time consuming, and the feasibility of being able to sit down with every single student, the 340 students, for about an hour each is pretty challenging. So we start kind of the year doing our post-secondary planning meeting with our seniors. That runs us through about the Thanksgiving timeframe. And then we roll into our junior ILP meetings, which we will do for you guys in the next year. That takes us through February or so. And then I will send out an email and say, hey, you know what? In 10th grade, if you are interested in just having kind of a sit down and having a conversation, that's more than available. But we don't have kind of it formalized. And I do appreciate waiting a little bit throughout this year, unless you have questions that come up. But doing this kind of like bigger process and bigger kind of planning conversation will probably be better fit for that springtime, because I want to make sure that the students that we need to sit down and talk to about this in that junior and senior year get the time that they need. And if I get 100 appointments for sophomores, unfortunately they won't have that time, and kind of more of the time sensitive period of the year for those 2 grade levels. So have an eye open for that. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And I do appreciate you watching this video, and hope here's to a great school year. And I look forward to meeting you if we haven't met, and working with you over the next 3 years. All right, have a great day.